Do you know, before I went to bed last night, I mentally predicted Fulham 3, Villa 0, and the merciful end of the Steven Gerrard era at Aston Villa, one of the worst eras in club history, quite frankly, at least as long as I've been alive. It was demoralizing, disastrous, fully deserved from Fulham. You had a terrible first half where Villa was completely toothless, goal conceded from a set piece, undisciplined red card, poorly given away penalty, saved, not saved, and then an own goal. I mean, what a deserving way to end your career at a club. That's how he'll be remembered. I only wish that that's how Christian Purslow will also be remembered, because he played a huge part in this. The fact that they did so little due diligence, that they were just jock sniffing basically, and that they didn't realize the dependence on the assistant coach in this particular regime, well, I'm sorry, but that's dismissal worthy in my world. It's time to clean house. And there are some indications that we could be seeing that. Now, here's where I'm going to look at the light at the end of the tunnel, because Newcastle United were in this very position last year. Do you remember? Eddie Howe comes in, things stabilized a little bit. They made a couple of very shrewd signings, and after the new year, the rise began. And now they're playing some swashbuckling football. This isn't going to be fixed in a week. It's not going to be fixed in a month. We won't start seeing any kind of improvement if the right person comes in until at least after the World Cup. But as long as we know we're going to see some progress, I'm okay with that. Let's discuss Steven Gerrard's dismissal and Fulham 3, Aston Villa 0. Now, the only thing that's mildly irritating is that the entire coaching staff wasn't swept out the door along with Steven Gerrard, but, a new person hasn't been appointed yet. Somebody has to keep the lights on. But if you think the entire morale is suddenly going to change at Bodymoor Heath because one individual's out the door, I got news for you. I could see a scenario where this actually gets worse, because now you've got a whole entourage of sitting duck coaches who, let's be honest, nobody new is going to retain. I don't know what any of these people do. And the players aren't going to listen to these yes men like Gary McAllister or Tom Culshaw. No chance. They're going to have as much resentment towards those guys as they did Gerrard. And it could actually be the same in reverse, because these players didn't perform. They got the manager the sack, and ultimately probably themselves too. So the sooner a new man is appointed, and the sooner that this toxic mess can be swept out, the better. And that includes Austin McPhee. There were obvious deficiencies in game management, tactical setup, approach, patterns. I mean, no two games looked alike, so the players are always wondering what their roles are. He was trying to bang square pegs into round holes. But his biggest failing for me was man management and how he dealt with Tyrone Mings. He didn't read the room right. And I honestly wonder if he thought that his iconic ex-pro status would somehow paper over all those deficiencies and all the tactical stuff, which he basically subcontracted to Michael Beale and then Neil Critchley. And that's hubris for me. And I've seen this movie before with Thierry Henry, who was an absolute ass as a coach. Great player. I love him as a pundit, but he was dreadful as a coach in Major League Soccer. And I feel like it's the same issue. These guys think that because they were excellent, iconic players, that that'll just translate and the players will do what they ask. But oftentimes they get frustrated with those players because the players can't do what they used to do, and they can't teach, and they don't have the time to nurture young talent. And so Thierry Henry left Montreal in tatters, and isn't it interesting now, a year later, Wilfried Nancy, the assistant coach, has Montreal in the semifinals in Major League Soccer. Once Steven Gerrard gets over the shock of the realization that his brand has been left in tatters, destroyed, because he's not getting another coaching gig for a long, long time, I'd be shocked if he got another Premier League appointment anytime soon. Even a championship appointment, I think, feels like a long shot right now. Once he gets over that, he's going to have to do some serious soul searching and self-reflection. And where he's going to have to start is with his man management, because ultimately that's what destroyed him. Ollie Watkins is a great example. He has destroyed Ollie Watkins. They're in preseason. Everything is going great. Confidence is high. They're winning games. They're coming from behind and getting results. Couldn't have gone any better. I know it's just preseason, but they come home on a high. And what does he do? Because he wants his own captain, he strips Tyrone Mings of the armband, a popular alpha male in the dressing room and the incumbent. But he goes one step further. He decides to make public comments about Tyrone Mings. Why? And although people say that was blown out of proportion, the reason why it was because I think the players inside the dressing room leaked stuff to the media about how unhappy they were with how that was handled. And they never recovered from that. And the first game was a perfect example of it as well. Then, after stripping Tyrone Mings of the captaincy and undermining him, he hands the armband to a player who, in my opinion, is not strong enough to even be starting in this team, and one that I believe rubs the other players the wrong way because he makes so many mistakes and because he's just basically handed a position that I don't think he deserves. That bugs teammates. And that's where I think the divide is in this dressing room. And that's why a new set of eyes, a new set of ideas is going to be critical right now, because we have to stop with these stubborn selections that we've seen for so long. And after rehabilitating this team's confidence, he's also going to have to how to blend it all together. Phil Coutinho is another one. It'll be interesting to watch how that's dealt with, because he came here for Steven Gerrard and the project. But if the new manager identifies the ingredients correctly, hopefully, in time, he'll be able to blend them together. I'm just glad it's finally over, and my mind is going back over so many warning signs now. And at least we're still with Castor, the brand that he actually has shares in with his friends. I mean, how brutal is that, by the way? Whose decision was it to say, well, you're the manager, but you also have shares in this brand, so let's outfit our whole team with your brand? I have a guess on who that might be. But honestly, when I think back, he was done already at Arsenal. The Man City thing was a blip, but you could tell in his own body language, somebody said something to him because you could feel there was a change at that point. The turning point for me was the West Ham game, because there was no reaction post Crystal Palace. Villa had so much of the ball against an opposition that was incredibly passive that day in a home game, and they couldn't break the opponent down, which was a recurring theme for quite some time. We should have probably seen some warning signs already in preseason, except the players that were excelling in preseason, Callum Chambers, Cameron Archer, didn't get a chance to play in the regular season, and that too sends a bad message, because the pundits see it, the fans see it, and the teammates see it too. He's played well. He's been binned and isn't getting another chance. Why? Now, perhaps the best little nugget of news I've come across over the last couple of days is that Nassif Sawiris himself would be leading the search for the new manager. Is that a good thing? The owner leading the search for such an important hire with arguably not very much footballing acumen, but the buck stops with him. He's now accountable to himself in this hire, and he's not turning the keys to the footballing kingdom back over to Christian Purslow again, which says an awful lot. In fact, if this quote is accurate and the article legit, it said Sawiris and Edens would lead the search with some help from Purslow and Lange. If I was those two, I'd be shitting myself right now because of the giant cluster that they've left this club in, which I successfully predicted 1 year ago. Now, is it possible that this cash infusion that the owners put into the club was to buy out Steven Gerrard? Or hopefully, is it to buy out Purslow? Because all the people who think that he should stick around for his business acumen and to help with the ground redevelopment, I'm sorry, I don't trust this guy as far as I could spit. I think he's a snake. I think he's a little man with little man syndrome and a massive ego, and he wants to sniff jocks and hang around with athletes, but he has absolutely no clue. I think he needs to go, and he should take Johan Lange with him, because that guy is nothing more than a yes man with a very expensive piece of software. We might be in a battle with some other clubs for managers. The neighbors Wolves went after Michael Beale. How ironic is that? He said no, but could you imagine the embarrassment if he took that on and then did better than us? That would be so Aston Villa. By the way, Wolves going after Peter Bosch, apparently, who is a guy I really rate. He's at Olympique Lyonnais. He was Leon Bailey's manager at those very exciting Bayer Leverkusen teams. He'd be a guy on my list for sure. Leicester City can't afford to fire Brendan Rodgers. I don't think he's going to be in the market, but anybody who thinks Brendan Rodgers is a solution with us needs to give their head a serious shake. We don't need more ego at our club. We need less. And then there's this rumor that Ralph Hasenhüttl is on his way out of Southampton. But all those clubs I mentioned don't hold a candle to Aston Villa. I'm sorry. Our stature, our resources, our stadium, our facilities, our youth development, and the core of our squad. There are players there to work with. And if you believe the rumors that the owners are going hardball on Pochettino and offering $10 million a year plus 2 bumper windows in January and the summer at least, if you're Pochettino, you don't know what's going to happen after the World Cup. Sometimes it's better to take the bird in the hand than the 2 in the bush. And I would love it. In fact, I would chuck it in if Pochettino had a hand in helping to identify a football director, which we so desperately need at our club. I mean, that would be a really enticing offer. Now, the one thing that might dissuade a Pochettino from coming to Aston Villa is precisely the Purslow-type executive hovering above and meddling in football decisions that he has absolutely no clue of. And Pochettino's already had one of those in his life in Daniel Levy. And although people say that they were super close, who ultimately benefited from that close relationship? Well, it wasn't Pochettino. He was made the fall guy after the poor start because Daniel Levy didn't refresh or rejuvenate that squad enough after the Champions League loss because he was too busy building a $1 billion stadium that had to have an NFL football field in it. Did you see how the Fulham players celebrated with Marco Silva after scoring the 1-0 goal? This is how I feel Villa players would react to a Pochettino. He is the quintessential man manager. That's his thing. He was also a credible player. He progressed both Southampton and Spurs onto better things. I'm going to write off what happened at PSG because I think that's a dysfunctional club. I think this is a match made in heaven, a guy who's going to be given the keys to the footballing kingdom to awaken the sleeping giant. And you know who would benefit the most by his arrival? The club's still record signing, Emi Buendia, who looks a shadow of himself. This is not the show I wanted to do necessarily, but it's 100% the show that I expected to be doing today. And you could see it all over Steven Gerrard's face during the last couple of press conferences, his body language and his reactions in the dugout. The smoke had been swirling for quite some time, and now the fire finally caught up with Steven Gerrard. Now, I don't like the run of fixtures that I see before me, and I think we're going to be going through a very bumpy period here, and we may have to buckle up and try to be patient. But like I said at the beginning, remember where Newcastle United were 1 year ago, and everything changed first with the appointment of Eddie Howe, and then some very shrewd and select signings. They didn't totally overhaul their squad. They were very strategic about what they did. That's what I'm hanging on to, and who knows, maybe by January and February, we're going to start to see the results. But until that time, stay positive, stay with me. I'll be there for you. And as always, up the mighty Villa.